in error, that this really was a violation of their terms of service and they should take it down. Twitter responded by permanently suspending my account because it was targeted harassment. My retweeting it and asking this was targeted harassment against the woman who was asking for our headquarters to be burnt down. And even worse, they banned the Satanic Temple's Twitter account at the same time just due to its association with me. And then that very weekend, which came like 2 days later, some guy came to our headquarters and tried to stab me with this makeshift shiv or whatever, very mentally ill kind of guy. And I had no idea whether it had any inspiration in this or whatever else. But I wrote something just claiming that, this kind of environment was being fomented by this attitude that death threats against us were uniquely unintrusive in some way and didn't need to be handled in the same way that any other death threat would need to be handled, or threat of violence or harassment or whatever else. And it started generating media. I did an interview with Newsweek, and they posted something about it. Then Fox posted something. So then shortly thereafter, Twitter reversed their position, but they still wouldn't verify it. And then a lawyer reached out offering to go pro bono on taking on Twitter on this for religious discrimination. And we thought it would be interesting, at the very least, we would learn where Twitter kind of stands on this. And, the whole social media environment is kind of this open frontier now where it's like, are they private entities? And is Facebook legitimately considered a private entity, being that it accepts all these kinds of government funds to do what it does and sells its data to the NSA and everybody else? It's, these are all kind of big questions which would be interesting to explore in litigation. So we accepted this lawyer's pro bono support and said, have at it. And then we started getting messages that this lawyer was this kind of alt-right lawyer, and people from inside the Satanic Temple were concerned that we'd be viewed as alt-right if we were using this lawyer for these services. The lawyer himself describes himself as extremely left-wing, nearly communist is how he put it. And people were messaging me and they're saying, well, he's also defended this guy and somebody else. And now they'll say he defends Alex Jones, but Alex Jones hired him after this guy offered pro bono support to us. But they never seem to mention that he also represents or represented P.Z. Myers, and P.Z. Myers is very much on the left, and he and the lawyer also represents some kind of feminist Muslims women's organization. I guess he also has this whole kind of list of far left organizations he's represented. He's just apparently hardcore First Amendment, but it didn't really matter to me. I don't get a lawyer approaching us with pro bono support, and I don't ask a lawyer in that situation how he voted. The lawyer is a functionary to me. The lawyer is a tool. I don't care what the lawyer's political position is. And people were really outraged, some people within the Satanic Temple, saying that we needed to drop this lawyer or people would think that we were Nazis. And I was trying to be diplomatic on this type of thing, but I was also asking people to answer me the basic question of how would we be supporting any kind of progressive cause by dumping this guy as a lawyer, and how would we be helping the alt-right, even if he were this alt-right lawyer, by utilizing his services? What were the costs and what were the benefits, and if they could point to something that would indicate that we were doing some kind of tangible harm by using a lawyer, which as I said, to me is just a tool in this kind of fight, then this could be brought to consideration. Nobody could do that. And yet it didn't take long before the idea that we could be seen as Nazis became, well, you're Nazis, or you're secretly alt-right, or you're a crypto-fascist, or whatever else, which I thought was also just this kind of foot-stamping childishness that didn't come from a place of reason at all. And there was no real legitimate excuse for that kind of behavior. I didn't think you just simply can't judge a lawyer by their clients. I mean, for fuck's sake, think about criminal defense. You don't hold it against a criminal defense lawyer for having defended murderers and rapists. And it's not about the client sometimes themselves, is it? It's about due process. It's about making sure that in the course of having somebody convicted for what they've done, even if they're guilty, that you're not setting new precedent that later on is used as a bludgeon against innocent people. And that kind of brought me back to the Satanic Panic, because some of the early precedent that convicted people in the Satanic Panic was set on bad evidence against people who were arguably bad people. One of the first kind of recovered memory cases was this Franklin guy. I forget the full name, but the details were that his daughter claimed that under the course of hypnosis, she recalled him murdering this missing girl in her neighborhood, who I think was a friend of hers. And there wasn't good evidence that this had actually happened. Everything she stated that she remembered could have been found in newspaper clippings and everything else. But it seemed like her father really was an abusive asshole, right? But that didn't mean that this evidence was good to convict him of this murder. And I think because there was good evidence that he was an abusive asshole, that these claims were taken much more seriously. They were willing to set a precedent that later on really damaged the lives of innocent people who were being bludgeoned by these claims of recovered memories of abuse, of things that almost certainly didn't happen. And some people spent upwards of 20 years in prison. Some people just being released in recent times who were convicted during the Satanic Panic. That's the reason you hold the due process. That's the reason why, even if somebody's guilty, you make sure that they have the best representation that they could have. It's not because you agree with the crime. It's not because you want them to get away with the crime, but you want to be certain that nobody else is a victim to what they did. You want to make sure that you're not causing a witch hunt just by putting a guilty person away. And I feel like a lot of these premises are kind of basic civics, and a lot of those values just aren't ingrained in people's heads today.
Yeah, just recently they overturned the convictions of the Kellers, Fran and Dan Keller. They were convicted in the early early 90s, and they were convicted for this whole satanic stuff, for having satanic rituals. I don't remember if they were their child or they were babysitting the child, but they were sentenced almost 50 years, and they didn't get out until 2013. Just very recently.
They spent like 20 years in prison. They spent around 20 years in prison on supernatural tales that absolutely had no basis in reality. And how do you give somebody that back? I mean, I think they won like a $3.6 million from the state or something, but 20 years of your life, and there's no multiple millions in money you can give somebody that will get that back. Their lives are forever stained by what happened there. And I think that's absolutely, that's a product of due process being undermined in the course of a witch hunt. And you can have witch hunts for all kinds of things that do exist in the real world. We often look at the Red Scare, and everybody recognizes that as a modern day witch hunt. Now, that doesn't mean that communists didn't exist. There were communist infiltrators even in the United States. It was just that the reaction was overblown, and people took to looking amongst their own allies for secret communist threat amongst them. And you don't want any cause to degenerate into that. No matter how outraged you are today against the alt-right or anybody else, you don't want to fall into that trap where you're looking amongst your allies for secret clues that are grossly implausible. This idea that different progressive left organizations are only secretly fascist and trying to insinuate themselves into this kind of leftist culture just to suddenly pull the rug out from under them and say, oh, surprise, you joined up with us, now you're a Nazi kind of thing. That's when you've crossed the line into a witch hunt. And that's not to say that there's not some problem with far right nationalism, that there's not really odious behavior, of course, on the part of what is generally termed as the alt-right. It just means we can't let them tear us apart by making us look at ourselves and cannibalize one another for this kind of impotent rage we have, and having no other approach onto how to actually confront the real enemy right before our faces. I mean, it's disappointing how easy it seems for progressive movements to be undermined by those kinds of purity tests. And I think it's something that's really held us back from a lot of progress.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big reason, in my opinion, that Trump actually became president, is because people who on the right that maybe would have come over to the Democrat side see these sort of infighting and this cannibalization over these labels, pejoratives, whatever you want to call them, and they default to the guy that's not gonna, that's as far away from that as possible. But you, speaking of jail, you mentioned there very quickly, and I just want to hear the story on this. You were attacked by a guy with a makeshift knife, out of the blue.
He didn't make any he didn't make any definitive moves to actually stab me. I managed to kind of talk him out of it. He was standing there and he was threatening, and everything was on our security cameras outside our headquarters in Salem. And I warned him, in all confidence, looking him in the face, that I would fuck him up if he did so. Whether I would have or not, I don't know. But it's important to have confidence and look somebody in the eye when you're saying that kind of thing. And it dissuaded him long enough that the cops arrived and they arrested him, and he was just some mentally ill guy.
Wow. It's funny that this is exactly what we spoke about the other day when somebody was advocating the position that if they didn't like what you were saying and felt that it was verbal violence, whatever that would entail. I do not believe in any way, shape, or form words can be held to a standard of being a violence. But if they didn't like that, this is the Antifa type narrative, that they could proactively attack you. They could actually try to silence you, quote, and this is their quote, by any means necessary. This is scary. This is something that actually is the antithesis of what I want to see in a society that is predicated upon having free speech, free dialogue, and open communications, and where the best ideas should hopefully win. Now, they don't always do that. That's unfortunate. But I think overall, the best ideas do eventually win. They do eventually go to the surface. But when you have somebody who advocates a position like the person on Twitter that said, that they should burn down the building of yours, I don't understand that narrative. It makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. It doesn't do anything to help anybody promote their ideas, and it just sends a chilling effect to anybody that has a disagreement and says things that you don't like to hear. Especially on Twitter, where it's somebody. I'll quote this from SJ for people we've seen her say it. She got it actually right. It's a microblogism of hell. It's basically just a microcosm of microblogging of hell, I think she put it. And if you can't handle somebody saying things that you don't want to hear on Twitter, there are other means by which you don't have to listen to it. Mute and block.
Well, I think people don't realize just how dedicated we are to a scientific worldview. Even when I talk about nonviolence, I'm looking at research, and I wrote a whole essay about this. There's been a lot of research done out of places like Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and other kind of research that compiles data based on dissident political movements and other kind of radical protest movements and things like that. And they've sought to determine what tactics work best. And, all the evidence shows right now that the nonviolent movements, especially when it comes to some kind of